start chatting chimps. So I know that some of you here have been following along since we started this journey last year, 2021. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a progress update. But before I do that, I'm just going to give a very, very quick introduction to your speakers for tonight. So we've obviously got me. Hello, my name is Natasha Coutts. I'm the Africa Programs Manager for the Jane Goodall Institute Australia. And then we've also got some fantastic chimpanzee conservation experts / superheroes with us tonight. So we've got Debbie Cox, who is a technical advisor to the JGI US office, specifically in the Africa Programs Department. Debbie will talk to you about her history, but just needless to say, she's been working with chimps for a very long time. She's been working in Africa for a very long time, so she's just a wealth of knowledge, and we're really, really grateful to have her here tonight to be sharing all that knowledge with you. And then we've also got Léonidas, who similarly has been involved in conservation for a very, very long time, specifically in Burundi. He is our man on the ground in Burundi and our implementing partner. So all of the work that we're doing in Burundi is as a result of his dedication and hard work, and he makes everything happen. So again, really grateful for Léonidas and his time and for sharing his time and knowledge with us tonight. And I hope that everyone here will make the most of having these wonderful people here and pick their brains and learn as much as you can. So without further ado, let's get started on the content. So for that progress update, for those of you that have been following along since we started the work last year, 2021, you'll remember that we had 3 chimpanzees that we were trying to support. In the 12 months that's passed, we now have another 3 that have since been rescued and transferred to Musée Vivant, the facility that we are working to support. So we now have a total of 6 chimps that we're trying to give a brighter future to. And you'll also remember that Flora, one of our main goals was getting her out of this horrible tiny little cage and into a more suitable environment. And I'm very glad to say that we have been able to achieve that. She is now in this much larger enclosure, and even better news, one of the chimpanzees that was rescued and transferred is Chippy. He is also a juvenile, and they are now roomies and best friends. So they very quickly bonded once Chippy came to Musée Vivant, and we're very, very pleased that Flora is not only out of the cage, she's now also with another chimpanzee and flourishing as a result of having that company. And we also had another construction, another room built. So we completed construction of that in 2021 with funding from JGIA. So for anyone that has been supporting this project, our work since the get-go, this is one of the major things that your generous support has helped to achieve. So building this room allowed us to have Avril and Lulu, who are 2 of the new chimpanzees, transferred over. And that now means that we now, as far as we know, we now have all captive chimpanzees in Burundi together at Musée Vivant, getting the specialized care and attention that they need. So that's a huge achievement. And then lastly, really excited to share that JGIA has formed an official partnership with Sydney Zoo earlier this year to be one of our supporters of this project. So specifically helping us to support the chimps at Musée Vivant, their care, their welfare, and also the housing costs. And we're really, really grateful that in December, so very recently, we received the first donation of $5,000. So that's so generous and really, really pleased and grateful to be working together, and really excited for the impact that we're going to have, positive impact we're going to have for these chimpanzees. Okay. Now, for those of you who haven't been following along, so you're new, I'm going to start off by setting the scene. Just to give you an idea of where we are geographically and to give you an overview of the socio-economic landscape that we're working within in Burundi, just so that you've got a relatively good idea of what we're talking about as we move through the presentations tonight. So Burundi, geographically, it's located in East Africa. It's a tiny little landlocked country nestled between Rwanda to the north, the Democratic Republic of Congo to the west, and then Tanzania to the east and to the south. It is the second most densely populated country in sub-Saharan Africa. Sadly, more than 3/4 of its citizens live in extreme poverty. The technical definition of extreme poverty is living on less than $1.90 per day. So this also makes it one of the poorest countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And in terms of land use, only 6% remains as natural forest, with the other 94% being used for agriculture, of which the large majority is subsistence agriculture. So what this means is that it's largely smallholder individual farmers that are growing crops to support themselves and their families. Now, to give you an overview of what we'll be sharing with you tonight, we're going to start off small and then expand out. So we're going to have Debby giving you an overview of JJ's history in Burundi, and also a bit of background on Musée Vivant, where the six captive chimpanzees live. And then we are going to expand out a bit with Léonidas, who's going to give you a bit more detail on the situation at Musée Vivant, and then link our work there to the broader conservation activities that are happening throughout Burundi, and to help you understand why it's the work that we're doing at Musée Vivant is so imperative to supporting and complementing that broader work that's happening. And then you've got me, and then I'm going to finish us off by zooming us out even further and sharing why Burundi is so crucial to chimpanzee conservation throughout East Africa, so looking at a regional perspective. So that's it from me for now. Over to you, Debby.
I hope everyone can hear me now. Finally worked out the technology. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. And just wanted to give you a little bit of background of myself and how I've become involved, re-involved, I suppose, back with Burundi as well. So I started working for the Jane Goodall Institute in 1994, and my first assignment was Burundi. And I was a co-director with Ali Wood, which you can see in the top left-hand corner there. And the reason we came involved in Burundi was the fact that the local government contacted Jane and asked her for help because they wanted to crack down on the illegal trade of wildlife, and they knew they had a lot of chimpanzees in the country. So they asked for help, and Jane facilitated that by setting up a halfway house. I came in 94 and as a co-director, and I was there for 2 years. We had to close it down, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But I then went on to the Institute, asked me to go to Uganda and basically start all over again in Uganda, building a sanctuary there. And then from there, I expanded out to the 2 Congos, and I've been working also in West Africa now in countries like Liberia. So my specialty is obviously sanctuary management and building sanctuaries. I've been doing that now for almost 30 years. Sadly, I still have to keep doing it, which, you know, is a bit of a sad thing, but we are getting better out there, I have to say, both in the illegal trade, and also in the protection of the chimps. But the other work that I have been involved in is actually working a lot with supporting rangers in the protected areas, and also working with the local communities on community conservation and also education. So these are all programs in almost every country that I've worked in that we've either built up to a further extent or had to create at that time. So we can go to the next slide, Tash. So in Burundi in 1994 is when I said I had arrived. At that time, we had 20 chimpanzees in our care. The first 10 chimpanzees actually had all been pets, held mostly in Bujumbura. Sometimes they were used as attractions for businesses like hotels, or even one poor chimp came out of a mechanic workshop where he was hung on suspended in a cage front of the door, and he was used as an attraction. Unfortunately for him, his name was Poco. He was never able to walk properly again, because all he could do was stand up or sit down. He couldn't actually walk properly, and he did that for about 5 or 6 years. And that actually caused long-term deformities in his hips. So he often walks bipedal instead of quadrupedal. But you'll learn a little bit more about Ili. You'll see Ili there in the black and white photograph releasing 2 young serval kittens. So apart from the chimpanzees, any sort of confiscation of an animal was often brought to the Jane Goodall Institute halfway house. And we hand raised these servals, and then we were able to take them back and successfully release them back into the Ruzizi National Park, which was very close to Bujumbura. The bottom left-hand corner, that cage and the chain, there's a very typical way of how the chimps would arrive to us. That chain was actually around a young chimpanzee called Nduronse. That chain weighed 13 kilos and Nduronse weighed only 7 kilos. So you imagine having a 13-kilo chain wrapped around your neck when you're only 7 kilos yourself. It was horrendous. We had to use bolt cutters to actually get it off, because they had welded the chain around his neck. And apart from doing the captive care, we wanted to make sure the staff in Burundi, we had 10 carers at that time looking after 20 chimps. And so we would do trips down to Gombe Stream National Park, and the team were able to see chimps in the wild and experience what natural behaviour of chimpanzee were, so that when they came back to care for all these young chimpanzees, they could mimic that behaviour and understand the chimps better from that time. So you can go to the next slide, Tash. So as I said, 1980s was when JGI first arrived, or was invited to come to to Burundi. We set up the halfway house straight away in Bujumbura with the idea that we would build a larger sanctuary in the southern region of Burundi. We created the plans for it. We had the budget, we had everything done. And then, of course, the genocide in Rwanda started in 1994. So I arrived in Burundi 2 weeks after the genocide started in Rwanda. And of course, it spilt over into Burundi as well. So we were seeing ethnic tension within the Burundian community, and a lot of civil unrest at that time. Because of that civil unrest, we had to put the building of the sanctuary in Burundi on hold. And we, sort of went into hibernation for 12 months, thinking that things will settle down, we'll be able to build the sanctuary still. But then in 1995, it sort of escalated, and we actually lost 2 of our own staff members. They were walking home one evening. They were our security guards. They were actually walking home in the morning. Sorry, they'd worked overnight. Were on their way home to their homes in the morning, and they were pulled off the bus with other people and were murdered basically by military. The whole bus, all the men were pulled off, and we found the bodies afterwards. And between those 2 men, they left behind 13 children without fathers. So it was very devastating for the staff. And we sort of decided at that time that we actually couldn't guarantee the chimpanzees' safety or our own staff safety, so it was time for another plan. We got agreement from the government that we could transfer the chimps to a sanctuary in East Africa, and the only sanctuary at that time that had the availability of housing, accommodating 20 chimps was in Kenya. So over 2 shipments, we transported all 20 chimpanzees to Kenya. And then I returned back to close out the halfway house and then drive our little Suzuki Samurai across the border through Rwanda and into Uganda and start all over again in building a sanctuary in Uganda instead. We did continue to support a habituation project in the Kibera forest, which Tash will talk more about later, which is an important area. And luckily, they've continued to do that habituation. So ecotourism for the Kibera forest is a possibility. So then in 2019, I was contacted by friends who were very concerned about chimpanzees were now living in Musée Vivant in pretty appalling conditions, and they wanted some technical support and obviously financial support of what to do next. So I then reached out to my network of friends, and we had met Léonidas at a workshop the year before in 2018. He was coordinating the Chimp Conservation Action Plan for the country. And so we sort of mobilised to then bring in JGI Australia to help us do something for these chimpanzees. So Musée Vivant was originally under the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport. And it was more of a cultural centre, but they did have some animals in it, which is why it's called Musée Vivant, which means living museum in French. But most of the animals were reptiles, not primates, and definitely not chimpanzees. So we were concerned about how the staff there would be able to look after the chimps and have the skills, expertise and resources to do it properly. So Léonidas came on board, and with making contacts with the ministries and then sort of realising that the government themselves were changing ministry. So now Musée Vivant is under the Ministry of Tourism, and that made it much easier for us to have an official relationship with the government on helping them redevelop Musée Vivant into a wildlife education centre. And of course, our first primary concern is getting the chimpanzees into suitable facilities that would meet international standards, and they could use this as a focal point for getting attraction for people to come in and see and experience Burundian wildlife at hand. The great thing is Bujumbura is the largest city in Burundi, and there are many schools in the area. So bringing school children to Musée Vivant is extremely easy, much easier than if we were a sanctuary out in the country area. So from an education perspective, Musée Vivant is the ideal location. Go now, Tad. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how complicated it is looking after chimps. Chimps, when they become adults, are 5 times stronger than us. They're very intelligent, which makes them very dangerous to keep in captivity, particularly when that captivity is unsuitable. And this is one of the complications that the Burundian government has seen when chimpanzees were initially bought as infants and people had them as pets, and then, of course, they grow up. And this is the story of Lulu and Avril. So a Canadian couple purchased this land, and unbeknownst to them, because they bought it when they were in Canada, when they arrived, they found they had 2 young adult chimpanzees in their backyard. In the cage that you can see, Léonidas is just touching one of the girls there now. We'd always said that if we could, we would take these chimps at a later date when we had all the facilities built. But unfortunately, the facilities continue to deteriorate. The lake level rose and their enclosure was flooded. and the people looking after them really couldn't afford to pay for any improvements to the facility. So rather than run the risk of the chimp enclosure breaking down and the chimps escaping, which would then mean probably someone would shoot them or somebody would get harmed, potentially killed, we decided that it was better that we transferred Avril and Lulu immediately to Musée Vivant instead of transferring Kiki and Joy into this new facility, which was the original plan. And then, as I said, it's very complicated. They are adult females, so they had to be sedated by a professional and then safely transported to the facilities and placed there. Luckily, we have a great relationship with a neighbouring sanctuary in Eastern DRC called Luwero, and they've been providing all of the veterinary expertise at this stage. And they've also been helping when we have to do integrations. We've been using them as well to help us with that process. You can go, Tash. So our next priorities for our 6 chimps is that we need to get the last 2 indoor rooms built. That's rooms 2 and 4. This will allow us to safely integrate all 6 chimps together. At the moment, we still have them all in pairs of 2, 2, 2. But with the construction of the next 2 rooms, we can then bring them all as one group. We also want to have our own veterinarian in country. Léonidas has found 2 great veterinarians, and what we would hope to do is be able to send them over to Luwero for training, and then they can come back and work within the Burundian government and with the NGOs. Not only would they be making sure the captive care of the chimps is good, but they would also be monitoring the wild population. As we've all experienced in the last 3 years with COVID, what that has done and made everyone far more aware of how deadly disease transmission can be. We also have Ebola outbreak in Uganda at the moment. So COVID, to date, we don't know whether COVID has a negative impact on wild populations of chimpanzees or gorillas. It's yet to be detected, but we know they have in captivity been exposed to it and contracted it. But we also know other diseases like polio, as we saw in Gombe, and measles are 2 deadly diseases as well. So monitoring our wild population as well as caring for our captive populations are priorities to us. Of course, conservation education in Musée Vivant is critical. Léonidas has been wanting to do this for the last 3 years, and it's a critical part of what happens next in the future. If the next generation have more compassion and understanding for wildlife needs, then we will be able to re-establish these forest corridors that are essential to the wild populations. And of course, the last for the chimps is that we would like to build the outdoor enclosure for the chimpanzees eventually. That would be our next big ticket item once we've got all these other 3s under our belt.
Great. Thank you so much, Debbie. You will hear from Debbie again after Léonidas, so you're not done with her yet. But now we'll hand the microphone over to Léonidas to tell us a little bit more about the situation currently at Musée Vivant and also the work that's being done throughout Burundi to protect their wild chimpanzee populations.
Okay, thanks a lot. I don't know if you hear me very well. My connection.
Loud and clear. Perhaps I spoke too soon. Are you still?
It's quite difficult for me. The connection is not good. I don't know if you hear me.
We can hear you now. You did drop out, but we can hear you clearly now. So let's try and see how we go.
Okay. Okay, I'm Léonidas. I'm the legal representative of a young organization called Conservation Community of Change, which is in close collaboration with JGI, Global, and other chapters. Okay, so It's very difficult on my side today. The connection is not good. Maybe I can ask Natasha to help me to make my presentation because it's very, very difficult. 1 minute, it's okay. 1 minute, yeah.
Okay. You're
What do
very
you
clear
think?
right now.
Can I continue?
Yeah. Let's try and continue. I think it'd be great for everyone to hear from you. So let's try.
Okay. we are working now in Nzigiyimpa where we have 6 chimpanzees, Cheetah, Joy, Flora, Lulu, Avril, and Chippy. So the Cheetah is a female with 15 years old, born into 2007, and I'm saying the connection is not really good. No, we have also another chimpanzee called Joy. It's a male, 20 years, born in 2002, arrived at Nzigiyimpa in 2015. It's an amazing chimpanzee which who likes to dance and very appreciated by many visitors. It's very complicated. Let me ask Natasha maybe to continue with my presentation. The connection is really very, very bad. Okay. What do you think, Jessica?
You're only dropping out for very short amounts of time. When you are here, it's very clear. So if you are comfortable continuing, I think it's fine. Okay. We'll just wait for you for like 10 seconds.
Let me continue.
Yeah, let's just keep going.
Okay.
We'll just roll with the punches.
Yeah.
Leonidas, maybe just turn off your video. If you turn your video off, we can still hear you. Yeah. And that may be better for you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, continue. We have my God.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we will go to plan B. Okay. So Debbie, you might be a little bit more familiar with the history of the chimps than I am. I can talk to some of the information, but Debbie, would you like to Léonidas and introduce each of the chimps?
I can take over.
Thank you.
So Avril and Lulu, I sort of already gave you the background to these 2 girls. They were being accommodated in a cage in a private setting down on the lake. It was a hotel that was then bought privately and taken over. Kita and Joy have always been at Musée Vivant, and the 2 younger ones, Chippy and Flora. If we can go to them, Tash. Yeah, so Flora was confiscated and brought to Musée Vivant in, I think, 2019. That was how I first was contacted, was because of her and the conditions that she was in that very small cage. Sheepy is another one, young male. He was being held privately by a Chinese man. And then, of course, Sheepy continued to grow and became a problem. And so eventually he was handed over to Musée Vivant as well. And this is a very common occurrence. People think they're great pets and they're very cute and they're going to have them like their little babies. And then, of course, by the time they get to 3 to 4 years of age, you've got an individual much stronger than you, who has high activity levels and who's very much 3-dimensional. and they become problem children very, very quickly, and people either put a chain around their neck like I showed you and tie them to a tree or in a garage or onto a car, and that's sort of the life that these poor chimpanzees end up living for a very long time until they get rescued by somebody, if they get rescued. Go to the next one, Tash. So one of the key things that we first got involved with was just making sure the chimps were getting fed. And to make sure they got fed properly, we also needed to find the right person to go out and buy the food, and also to train the staff about chimpanzees. Fortunately for us, Eli was still back in Burundi. Eli was our head carer for JGI way back in 1994. So we were able to reach out to Eli and ask him if he could come and help. So the great thing in Burundi, they have fantastic food. It's like the breadbasket of Africa, if you've ever seen it. They have the best avocados, the best bananas, the best strawberries, best pineapples. It's unbelievable food, and not badly priced, to tell you the truth. So Eli goes out 3 times a week to collect the food and bring it back in, and then works with the staff on making sure the chimps get fed properly. It is a constant process. I think it averages $120 per chimp. And so when we first started, it was only $360, but now it's also double because we now have 6 chimpanzees. So making sure that there's enough food every month for the chimps is one of our biggest priorities. This is Eli. He's our hero of the day. Thank God for Eli being there and being such a good chimp whisperer. Here you can see him with Sheepy and Flora, and he helped with the integration of these 2 chimps. And you'll see videos of him with the adult chimpanzees, and you can see the incredible relationship that he can have. Eli, way back in 1994, he went with me the first time to take the first 10 adult chimpanzees out of Burundi to Kenya. And then he stayed with me for a month in Kenya to help with the integration of all of the chimps together there. And then we both came back home to Burundi to take care of the next 10 chimps and then prepare them for transfer to Kenya as well. So both Kiki and Joy now, Kiki and Flora are doing really good. They're getting on well together, but it is time for them to be integrated with adults as well. So we would like to be able to get get Lulu and Avril integrated with these 2 younger chimpanzees as well, which will be very stimulating for everybody. You can see the enclosure of the younger chimps and Avril are in much better condition than what poor Kiki, Kita and Joy have. They're still in the original old enclosure. It's starting to break down. And so we are concerned about the safety of both public and chimpanzees with this enclosure. So the sooner we can get the next large room built so we can move them in, the better for everybody. But right now, at least Flora, Chippy, Avril and Lulu are in really good facilities, which were all funded by JGI, and the first one was funded through PASA. Who is another partner organisation with us. So conservation of in Burundi. So Burundi is an interesting country. There are sort of like 2 separate populations. There's what we call the northern population in the Kibera forest, and then in the southern forest, the southern area, there are all these small pockets of forest, which is where Léonidas has set up an excellent program for working with the communities to try and establish corridors between the forest patches to connect the chimpanzee population here, and also to ensure that these forests are remained and retained so that the local population don't continue to degrade these forests as well. So they do a lot of work in tree planting, improved agriculture in these areas, and also working within the schools as well. So you'll see the red triangles is where they've got schools program. You see where the protected areas are, and pretty much all around there, they're working with various communities to protect them. In this area, Burundi Forest is the one that has the largest population. We think maybe 50 chimpanzees are in that area. If Burundi Forest, it's interesting because it just shows you as a big green area, but in actual fact, the boundary of Burundi Forest is actually pine forest, not natural forest. And it's only, the natural forest is only in the center of the forest. If Burundi Forest was, all of that pine forest was cut down and allowed regeneration of natural forest, we would actually be able to make that forest 3 times the capacity of what it is today for chimpanzees. So there's an area that's already a protected area. So just doing a restoration program in Burundi Forest can make a big difference to the southern chimpanzee population. And then, of course, these stepping stones between them. The cool thing is chimpanzees don't need to have continuous forest. They will move through a savanna landscape because a lot of this area is sort of forest patches in valleys or on hilltops. And the chimpanzees actually do move through what we call Myombe woodland in order to get from one forest patch to the other, which is exactly what happens in Tanzania. Next slide. So here's, oops. Yeah, so you can see that look very big, but now you can see it in the whole country that there are these small areas. And you can just see that there's this line of forest that connects down to the southern end, which connects to Tanzania. So this is a very important part for us for the southern population, is to maintain connectivity and to restore habitat wherever we can. So some of the work that the 3 Cs do. So Léonidas is not only the chairman of JGI Burundi, but he also has his own organisation, which is called the 3 Cs, which is conservation, chimpanzees, and communities. So here he's been working with sensitisation of the communities neighbouring these protected areas. They've already been able to have reached out to 1,100 people. They've got 6 pilot clubs going, so roots and shoots. They've been able to do mapping of the chimpanzee population in the south. I believe there are still 4 people out there mapping the chimpanzees. They've been able to do demarcation of some of the protected area, but there's still more demarcation. So when we talk about demarcation, we may have a protected area, but local people don't know where the boundaries are. So demarcation means that we go and put like posters or billboards or markings either on trees or concrete markers that go around the forest to ensure that people don't encroach into the forest or into the protected area. There's often a lot of disputes because of this happening. So very clear boundary lines is really important to avoid conflict with local communities and wildlife people. Where they've also been able to do tree planting of the indigenous, as I said, doing reforestation programs. Now, the seedlings are not just for chimpanzees forest restoration, but also a lot of these trees are also important for the communities, for firewood, for construction, these things as well. So keeping a nice forest and also to stop soil erosion is a big problem in Burundi these days. And with these heavy rainfalls that we're seeing now, big rains will end up causing not only erosion, but mudslides and, you know, whole villages can be wiped out. So restoring this habitat is not only critical for chimps, but it's also critical for the human communities. One of the areas where you can often have conflict between wildlife and communities is often it's about access to water. Everybody needs to drink water. Chimpanzees need to drink water as well. And often in water places, like natural water sources, that can come with conflict zones. So one of the things that Léonidas's group has been doing is establishing supply lines of water to the villages so they don't have to go into the forest in order to get their water. And this, again, is very important to help reduce conflict between wildlife and the human communities. They've also been able to continually support community rangers who do daily patrols around the forest with the government protected area rangers as well. So you've got both groups working close together. And this, again, helps stop any conflict between protected areas and local communities. Here we see them working on, so the cool thing is here you'll see them, this is with the bananas. They use them to make the little carriers for putting the soil and the seedlings. And then they'll do major tree planting programs. So here we've got 16 roots and shoots groups working, and here they've been able, so this is right down in the south part of Burundi. They've already been able to plant over 500,000 trees in that area, and the beneficiaries are over 1,300 households. So we're looking down there in the south. So there's still more work to be done in the mapping and the demarcation in these lower forest areas closer to the Tanzanian border. These areas are very critical. They're much smaller forest patches, but they're absolutely critical in connecting the Tanzanian chimp population to the southern Burundian population. It will be pretty much impossible for us to reconnect the southern population of Burundi chimps to the northern population of the Burundi chimps. The only way for the southern population to survive is having a good connection with the Tanzanian population. So we want to go back to our priorities. So one of the reasons why we're having the webinar is not only to give you the background of what's happening, but just to let you know what our priority next steps are. So as I said, you saw photographs of the beautiful room that we built that Lulu and Avril stole from Kitta and Joy. So now what we want to do is build Kitta and Joy's room, which is going to be adjacent to Lulu and Avril's. It's exactly the same size. So that will then double our space, and they'll have connection with a sliding door. So it'll make it very, very easy for us to integrate all of the adult chimps together and then start integration with Flora and Shippy. We also want to build a smaller room off Flora and Shippy's room. That room can then be used as a quarantine room or if someone's sick, but also just an extra space if we need to separate individuals out, particularly at nighttime. It's probably better for us at nighttime to separate the chimps out when there's no human around keeping an eye on them, so the younger chimps can have their time and space away from the adults at nighttime, and then they get reintegrated together during the day. So this is the room that we built. So on the back side of this building is where we would build identical. So it'll then be twice that size. And this brick wall, that becomes the wall for the outside enclosure. So that becomes part of the outside enclosure into the future. And then we'll reconnect them to the original room built for Flora. So that's the next phase for us, is to get Kitta and Joy into that room. And that way, where Kitta and Joy's old enclosure is, which is near the mango tree, near the snake building, it now frees us up to take this whole area. It's a nice size, 15 metres by 22 metres. And then we have an idea from Rockhampton Zoo to build a replica to their enclosure. It's a suitable facility. It can be made locally. It's not too technical, and it'll be a beautiful area for them. And because they've already got some trees in that area, the trees will continue to stay there and be part of that enclosure. So the floor area will be just natural soil. We'll just have a retaining wall around the whole thing to support it. But it'll be a fantastic area for putting the chimps into, and that will allow us in the future to hold up to 13 chimps if we ever need it. At the moment, we hope that we'll only ever have the 6, but we do have to always plan for the future that potentially more chimpanzees may get confiscated in the future. At this stage, we're not aware of any other chimpanzees being held in captivity, and we hope with the awareness programs that Léonidas has already done that the word is out not to bring more chimps across for the illegal trade from the Congo, because all of these chimpanzees originated from Congo. They did not come from Burundi. Burundians pretty much don't touch their chimpanzees. This is why the population is stable in Burundi. It's more that they're coming out of the Congo. And then in the future, hopefully, if we get our nice big outdoor enclosure, then I would like to build one extra room This room we can then use for quarantining if new chimps come in or if somebody's sick, and they can be separated from the rest of the chimps. And that will then allow us up to 13 chimps, and hopefully we'll never reach that number.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. And thank you, Léonidas. You did give it your best shot, but unfortunately the connection was not in our favor today. But thank you for persevering. I really appreciate it. And hopefully everyone here appreciates the effort that you put into trying to share the information with us. But also a huge thank you to Debbie for stepping in and doing such a great job filling in for Léonidas. That was really, really informative. Okay, so now, as I said, I am going to zoom us out even further. I'm going to broaden our scope and talk a bit about how Burundi fits into the bigger picture of chimp conservation in the region. So specifically, we're going to look at why Burundi is absolutely pivotal to ensuring the survival of chimp populations in both Tanzania to the south, as you can see on the map here, and then also Rwanda here to the north. But before we launch in, I'm going to start by defining a key term, habitat fragmentation, just in case some of you here aren't familiar with the more technical, sciencey terminology. It's something that I'm going to keep coming back to, as it's one of the leading threats to chimpanzees in East Africa, which is the region we're looking at. So I want to make sure that everyone's following along without any confusion. So habitat fragmentation is essentially the process of breaking apart once continuous habitats. In this instance, we're talking about forests into smaller isolated patches or fragments. So this image here should help you visualize how it happens. So you've got the black box represents once continuous forest, and then over time, it's slowly broken apart until you essentially have just little patches or islands of forest. So when habitats become highly fragmented, we generally see decreases in the overall quality of the habitat and also in biodiversity. And then that tends to lead to increases in localized extinction, which means species are lost from that particular location. For chimpanzees, this lack of connectivity is extremely problematic for a number of reasons. Mainly, female chimpanzees will typically transfer to a new group when they reach sexual maturity. So this promotes the flow of new genes and thus prevents inbreeding. But when different groups are disconnected and the distance between them is too far for a female to travel, so as just referring back to what Debbie said, it doesn't have to be completely contiguous. It doesn't have to be one long forest, but the distance has to be small enough for a chimpanzee to feel safe to move to another location, or to have an idea that there may be other chimpanzees there to go looking for to join the new group. So when that distance is too great, a female won't transfer, she won't leave, and her genes stay there with her. Now, this isn't a genetics lesson, so I'm not going to go into detail about how and why inbreeding is bad, but in a nutshell, it's generally associated with negative impacts on population size, which then leads to local extinction if it's left unchecked. The other reason that fragmentation impacts the survival of chimps is because of its effect on habitat quality. So generally speaking, the diversity of tree species in fragmented habitats is lower compared to undisturbed, continuous, more pristine sort of habitats. Chimps do tend to eat a lot of the different tree species in the forest that they live in. And as a result of this, the trees have become adapted to being eaten, and they use chimps as one of their primary means of seed dispersal, so to sort of being distributed throughout the forest. So with fragmentation, as the number of trees dwindle due to the ecological processes that are associated with fragmentation, there are fewer for the chimps to eat, and then when the chimps don't eat them, the seeds don't get dispersed, so the new trees don't grow, and so starts this negative feedback loop that goes on until a habitat's so depleted that it can no longer sustain chimps, and then without the chimps, it can't regenerate, and that's when you get the breakdown of the ecosystem, so everything just sort of collapses. Now we're all experts on habitat fragmentation. Let's set our sights on the southern part of Burundi, as well as a place most of you are likely familiar with, Gombe National Park in Tanzania, where Jane began her groundbreaking research on chimpanzees in 1960. Here we have Jane undertaking her observations, and we can already see way back when Jane started that there was some of the loss of forest happening, and the Gombe National Park starting to become fragmented and isolated from the neighbouring forests. As we saw in Léonidas/Debby's presentation, Burundi's southern chimpanzee populations exist within a highly fragmented landscape. Sadly, despite being a protected area, this is also the case for Gombe National Park, which now is essentially an island-like fragment. And then when we look at the individual population sizes, they're all quite small. So we can see here Burundi Forest, which is the one sort of further up, the most northern one in Burundi. We've got about 60 chimps, then moving down to Vianda, we've got about 30, and then Lukungu Rukambasi, there are estimated to be about 20 chimpanzees there. And then when we skip down to Gombe National Park, right down here at the bottom, there are roughly about 85 chimpanzees currently within Gombe. Looking at them individually, they are well below the required threshold, which is about 500 for a chimpanzee population to be considered viable. However, when they're combined, they do reach that minimum size. And as Debby mentioned, the good news is that preliminary modelling actually shows that the most feasible option for ensuring the long-term future of chimps, not just in Burundi, so on that side of the border, but then when we look at Tanzania, getting this corridor happening is also the most feasible option for long-term persistence of chimpanzees in Tanzania as well. The good news is that JGI is currently working with the communities that are living in and around the corridor to help them preserve or establish community managed forests. So this white box here, you can see that encompasses the majority of that planned corridor area. And over here, we've got the distances between the different sites. So starting small, Tanzania, that's the smallest distance that we have to cross. So getting from Gombe, from the border there through to the country border, so with Burundi, that's about 25 kilometres. And then linking that up with these forests down here, immediately on the other side of the border in Burundi, and then trying to join that up with Vianda, that's a total of 50 kilometres. And then if we can extend it all the way up to Bururi, we're looking at a distance of about 80 kilometres. So it doesn't seem like that far a distance, 80 kilometres, it's not that great, but there are quite a number of people living in this area. So it's not as straightforward as it may seem. So as I mentioned, JGI is currently working with communities that are living in and around this area to help them try and preserve and establish the community managed forests, with the vision that eventually all of these individual smaller forests will be located close enough together to not necessarily be one continuous corridor, but it will be functional enough that the chimpanzees will be able to use it to disperse and get that gene flow happening again between Gombe and Burundi. Now, just to give you an idea of the situation there, so this is a recent map from a survey by JGI, and you can see the pink circles, or the sort of peachy coloured circles. They are from 2020 locations where chimpanzees were detected within that corridor area, that designated corridor area. So even though there are only a handful of small forest patches currently, and there are lots of challenges, which are shown here in this image, you can see through the trees there on the other side, that brown patch, that is a clearing within one of those community managed forests. So the challenges are ongoing, but we do continue, and we are seeing some success. And there is an indication that if we persevere, and that if we can expand these forests and with the proper protection, that we can be successful in joining these populations up again and ensuring the long-term survival or persistence of chimpanzees in the region, because we do have that evidence from the surveys to show that there are at least signs of 5 to 10 chimps continuously over the years. We're seeing roughly around the same number, so they are persisting. It can work. We just need to keep going with it. Okay, so now we've looked at the southern section. Now we're going to move north, and we're going to look at both Kibera National Park in Burundi, and then also jump over the border north to Nyungwe National Park and Rwanda. So as you can see here, we do actually have a large continuous forest that is home to chimpanzees still existing in this area, and it straddles both Burundi and Rwanda. So when we're looking at the Burundi side, it's called Kibera National Park. But then when we jump over and we're in Rwanda, it's referred to as Nyungwe Forest National Park. So even though they do have different names and there is a country border running through them, it's arbitrary. It's essentially one big continuous forest. And it's this forest is crucial to conservation of chimpanzees in the region, because both of these parks represent the most critical chimpanzee conservation sites, as they have the largest remaining interbreeding population. So when we break down the numbers, again, we can see that on their own, the numbers aren't great enough to meet that minimum viability threshold of 500. But again, when they're combined, they're well above that. We're looking at closer to 600. So it's really, really important from a conservation perspective that they are considered and protected as one cohesive unit. So we can see here, if we look beyond Nyungwe in Rwanda, there are still 2 other smaller populations that exist. We've got Chamadongo Forest, which is about 10 kilometers to the west of Nyungwe National Park, and that's got about 20 chimps. And then we've got Gishwati Forest National Park, which is about 50 kilometers north of Nyungwe, again with about 30 chimps. But clearly, those numbers are too small. So that really just emphasizes how important Nyungwe and Kibera are to keeping chimpanzees in Rwanda, to preventing local extinction within the country. And then in addition to being crucial to preventing extinction of chimps from Rwanda, and also potentially Burundi, they're also important for protecting the ecological and cultural diversity of chimps as a species. So when it comes to chimps, groups have very highly specialized behavioral and ecological repertoires that are distinct from other chimp groups. For example, they will use different types of tools, and they'll use them in different ways, looking at one group to another. So a chimp isn't a chimp, if that makes sense. Now, a fun fact about the Nyungwe chimps, they live at the highest known elevation of chimps throughout their entire range across Africa, which makes them really important, as well as really interesting and unique from an adaptation point of view. So, for example, asking questions like, how have they been able to make use of the limited resources found at such high elevations to be able to survive? And what's different about their behavior in diet and physiology compared to chimps living at lower elevations? Now, unfortunately, these chimps are severely understudied compared to chimps in, say, Tanzania, Uganda, Thai forest in West Africa, where most of our knowledge of chimps has come from. So a lot of these questions still remain unanswered, but me and some of my colleagues at the University of Western Australia are on the case, and we're trying to change that. So we have been undertaking a variety of different research and different studies over the past 5 years, trying to answer some of these questions, and in answering those questions, trying to improve conservation as well. So, for example, we have discovered that these chimpanzees will preferentially eat figs. So this is what the picture is showing here. So we can see adult female here, her name is Itchy Juju. She is stuffing her face with some ripe figs that she looks like she's having a very good time eating. So they will preferentially eat them. However, when you compare them to chimpanzees in, say, Tanzania or Uganda, or most research coming out of other chimpanzee study sites, figs tend to be a fallback food. So it's something that they'll eat when their preferred food items are out of season and not available, because they need to eat something. So they'll eat these. Whereas, as I was saying, the flip side, the Nyungwe chimps seem to prefer to eat these when there is other food available. So that's just one thing that we've discovered that's different about them, and that's just scratching the surface. The more time we spend studying them, the more we find out about them. I'm sure the more we'll come to realize that they are unique and they are really special, and we do need to prioritize protecting them so that we don't lose that ecological and cultural diversity within chimpanzees across Africa. In terms of my research and what I'm doing on a personal level to try and answer some of those questions. So I actually spent about a little over 2 years in Rwanda, in Nyungwe National Park, as well as Chambadongo Forest. So that was that on the map. It was that little 4 square kilometre fragment with the 20 chimpanzees about 10 kilometres west of Nyungwe. My research is for my PhD, and trying to understand how fragmentation impacts their diet, their social dynamics, and then their gut microbiome as well. So trying to understand this process of habitat fragmentation and how it impacts the chimps on a variety of different levels. So that's it from me. Hopefully that helped to give you a good overview as to why we're really honing in and focusing in on Burundi as a country, and why it's so pivotal to success in achieving chimpanzee conservation goals throughout East Africa. Even though we do have that broader strategy, we are starting small, and we're trying to focus in, and we're really prioritizing improving the welfare of those 6 chimpanzees that are at Musée Vivant. So as we mentioned, food is one of the key things that we need to provide them with. Each chimp, it costs $120 per month to feed them. So combined across the 6, we're looking at a budget of $720 a month, or looking at that over the whole year, which we're trying to generate the funds for, it's $8,640 to feed them all. And then trying to make sure that they get the care and support that they need. So for Ili, he has a salary of $580 a month, or $6,960 a year. And then for those, the medical visits from the chimp specialist vet at Luire that Debbie spoke about, it's $1,600 for a visit for Luis, the vet, to come and give the chimps their annual health check, make sure that they're all above board. And then lastly, we've got the housing costs. So Debbie really emphasized how important this is to integrating those chimps. So as we've said, we've got them in pairs, but ideally we would like to have them all together as one cohesive, integrated community like they would be in the wild. But we need that extra room to be able to undertake that integration process, because it can be tricky, it can be quite lengthy, and we need that extra facility to ensure that we do it safely. And to complete the housing costs for that additional enclosure, we're looking at another $25,000. So that brings us to a fundraising total for the year. Our goal is $42,200. So far, we're sitting at $8,620. which gives us a little over 33,000 to go. So, you know, we're on our way, but we still have a bit of work ahead of us. So if you are finding yourself in a position to help us, and if you are feeling inspired to give these chimps a safe and secure future, these are some ways that you can help us out. So $120, as we said, is enough to feed a chimp like Chippy for the entire month. Or if you want to go a little bit further, you can cover Ellie's salary for a whole month. If your pockets are particularly deep and you wanted to cover the vet visit, again, that's $1,600, and that will make sure that all 6 chimpanzees are happy and healthy. And if your pockets are extremely deep, we've got that room that needs to be built, and that's $25,000. And I'm very excited to share that from a generous donor who has been supporting this work since last year, Daniela Osiander. She has very, very, very generously agreed to dollar match donations. So if you give before Christmas, your gift will be doubled up to $5,000. So that means that essentially you are doubling your impact and doubling the benefit that you'll bring to these chimpanzees. So that's it. We've talked a little bit more than we initially had planned for, but we do want to make sure we still give you time to ask questions. So if anyone has questions, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, this is would have been for Léonidas, but he's probably still disconnected. So I'll ask Debby, because I know she'll probably know the answer anyway, and knows from firsthand experience. The political situation in Burundi, Deb, has been, well, you know, you've already explained in your talk, has been fraught, leading to the abandonment of the country there for a while. Things now seem to be slowly getting better there. There seems to be a lot less tension between the various tribal groups. So I just was wondering if you had a comment about that political situation, you know, the background to what's happening in Burundi and why things are more stable there now.
I wouldn't say it's not ideal. It's not where we would like it to be politically, but yes, it has been stable, and they have had elections, free, fair elections, and changeover of power. So that's a really good sign of moving forward. I think from our perspective, from a conservation level and the protected areas and the chimpanzees, the great thing is that the protected area authorities have remained stable. You've still got highly qualified technicians working for them. They know what they have to do. So it's really more about the country being able to rebuild itself, you know, economically. That's the biggest challenge for that country. And as Natasha pointed out at the beginning, you know, it's always going to be a challenge because this is a large population and it's also a young population. I'd say 50% of the population is probably under 30 years of age. So you've still got a young population coming. And 80% of the population is still reliant on subsistence agriculture. So making that paradigm shift away from that, getting people employed in other activities instead of just feeding themselves, that's obviously the biggest challenge for the country. And anything that we can do to help that, you know, and show people a different way will be a bonus to everybody.
So does having a young population, Deb, perhaps is perhaps an advantage in that you've got, you know, when you have a younger population, they tend to, it's obviously a stereotype, but they do tend to bring on new ideas, you know, rather than old traditions that have been carried on for a long time. Is that potentially a source of optimism?
Yeah, and I think that's why Léonidas really focuses on education. If we can get to the younger population at an early stage and show them different ways of doing agriculture and different ways of looking at their environment and wildlife, then yes, we can have they can all become ambassadors and custodians very, very quickly and easily.
especially if they, as has been the case in various aspects in Rwandan life, people see the benefits associated with preserving wildlife rather than attacking, using it as a resource for food or whatever. Or I know that's not the case with chimps in Burundi, but clearing the land, there's actually a willingness to support conservation because there's an economic dividend associated with that.
Yeah, and hopefully economic stability will allow tourism to come, yeah. And which is why we've always maintained the importance of ecotourism, like in Kibera forests, because, once there is stable and people feel confident to come, we already have the resource there available for everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, Deb.
So Lyndall has just made a comment. I think it is just following on from what you are discussing. So Lyndall says, so you said the people of Burundi don't touch their chimps. Does that mean there is no bushmeat trade?
Well, not in chimpanzee or primate meat. So they will eat, obviously, crocodiles and antelope. If they can hunt them. But traditionally, Burundians have not been, they're agriculturalists and pastoralists, and it was sort of culturally taboo to eat wild animals. It was considered, if you had to eat wild animals, you were poor, and they actually considered people from DRC who do eat wild meat as their primary meat to be like barbarians, that they weren't cultured. So that's one of the reasons why the chimp population in Burundi has been safe and stable, is because of that cultural belief system. But we have to be careful, because if there's migrants coming in from Eastern DRC and moving into Burundi, they can change culture pretty quick. And that is something I know Léonidas is concerned with.
There was a comment which was sent through earlier this evening from Dan Smith. I don't want to speak for you, Dan, so if you're still here and want to ask, otherwise I'll just read it out. Dan says, thanks for the incredible work you're doing. Are there still more captive chimpanzees to rescue in Burundi?
As far as we know, no, not at this stage. Yeah, as far as we know. We've not been given any intel that there are more chimpanzees out there. The ones that we have now were the ones that we knew of originally 3 years ago. And so we're hoping that there is no more coming through. But things can change, obviously. But we're sort of hoping that the authorities are sort of on top of it now, because they know this work's happening at Musée Vivant, that it actually encourages them to do the right thing of law enforcement.
And Deb, I remember speaking to you previously, and one of the issues that I know you were dealing with when you were working at the Halfway House was that Burundi was a staging point for chimps from DRC to go through to the Middle East or other places. But it sounds like that trade has been more seriously dealt with.
I'd say not so much has been seriously dealt with. It's just that they're using aeroplanes to go straight direct. Yeah. Instead of because otherwise they were going by land across into Tanzania to Dar es Salaam now. But now, if the illegal trade is under the control of the same people who do illegal arms trade, illegal diamonds, minerals, all that, it's the same people who do it all, then they have the resources to just fly them through.
Go straight past, yeah.
So the ones that are coming by land are really just the little guys, not the big guys.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, just speak up if you have a question. Otherwise, pop it in the chat and we're happy to read them out for you if there's any audio issues. Okay. So shame about Léonidas. I'm so sorry about the audio. We did get one, actually, we've got a couple of questions which have come through in response to the EDM for people who weren't able to attend. So I might just ask you guys if that is okay, and we'll share this recording with those people. So Lindy has said that she wanted to know more about Chippy's family, and also, excuse me, about the wage for Ellie, or I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but would there be scope to have another carer if there were more chimpanzees brought in? Is that a prospect?
Well, what we hope to do with Ellie is to use him as a trainer to train staff at Musée Vivant to be able to be, really good chimp caregivers. So doing more training with them, also maybe sending them across to Luero to get an experience in a much larger sanctuary setting. I mean, they have over 80 chimps. I think it might be even close to 100 now. So they have multiple groups with adults and young ones. So it'll be a great experience for them to go there and see a sanctuary that's been going now for almost 20 years. Actually, Luero started in 2003. So that would be the idea. And then to give better support to Musée Vivant to have regular qualified staff would be our next step. As Léonidas pointed out, Eli's not a young man. He's in his 60s. So we need young blood to come through and take over this role for us, because these chimps are going to be there for the next 40 to 50 years. So we definitely need a younger generation coming in and learning from someone like Eli.
Mm-hmm.
And Shippy. We don't know much more. I just know from the report done in 2019 that Shippy had been purchased by a Chinese businessman and was kept as a pet. And in 2019, we had approached them about him letting Shippy come into Musée Vivant to join Flora and the other chimps back then, but he refused at that stage. He still wanted to keep him. He had obviously influence within the government, so the government wasn't forcing it. And we didn't actually push it too much because we knew Shippy was being cared for well, like he was getting fed well and looked after. And the reality is our facilities wasn't appropriate for Shippy to come to join us. So once the new facilities were built, obviously Shippy had already grown up a couple more years, and then they realised he was becoming a problem to them. So they then reached out and said that they would like to surrender him in, and that was all done officially. So that was good.
And there is a little bit more information about the individual chimps on our landing page as well, and we will be adding more content to our website as well over the coming weeks and into the new year. So updates that we have on the 6 chimps will provide sort of real-time updates for everybody as well. Just one more question from a supporter who was unable to join. Amanda asked, what about emergency care for chimps? So I suppose she's referring to if there was a sort of timely urgency, what do we do in that scenario? And do we have backup emergency funding if required?
Well, at this stage, our biggest priority is the new facility so that we can get all the chimps together. We rely heavily on veterinary emergency from Luero, and they've always offered to help us with that. And the sanctuary organisation they belong to, PASA, the Pan-African Sanctuary Alliance, they were the ones who paid for Flora's cage. And so we would always maintain with them, and they often have an emergency fund. So if we really had something come up, we would probably approach PASA to help us out in that case.
And I guess that does speak to the amount of the 1,600, which would cover the veterinary costs to have someone come in. So that 1,061 is sort of like a regular health check. So if you take at the moment our 2 adult females, Lulu and Avril,
we will need to put them on contraceptive at some stage. And that's a cost. I mean, a contraceptive implant is in US dollars about 120 US dollars. So that's about, what, 160 Australian dollars for one implant that lasts for 2 years. So, you know, we don't want to breed chimps in captivity. That is not the goal of the organisation or the facility. We just want to provide these unfortunate chimps a good home and a good life, but we do not want to breed chimps in captivity. Our goal is to save the chimps in the wild and to do everything we can to protect and enhance the survivorship of chimps in the wild, not in captivity.
Yep. Okay, well, I don't think there's any other questions that have been written in, unless anybody has any more that they want to shout out.
I've got another. Sorry,
No, it's good. Thank you,
Dave. The question. This one actually was for Natasha. I was fascinated by the chimps that you were studying in the highlands sort of areas. Is there any evidence that there's movement of chimp groups, or particularly females, out of those highland areas to other forest areas, or do they seem to be fairly that culture, do they seem to be staying in that highland area?
Yeah, so within Nyungwe, they do seem to be contained. Depending where the different communities are located within that forest, chimpanzees are highly, highly territorial, so that you don't tend to have overlap between communities. So if you have some that are kind of up north, there won't be too much overlap with those, but you will sometimes get the females sort of skipping some of those intermediate groups and going all the way down into Kibera. So just to clarify, Kibera is still technically Afro-montane, so it's still a high elevation. It's just not as high elevation as the ones that are in Nyungwe. Nyungwe is the highest point, it's the peak. So that you will still see some sort of transferring down into Kibera, but it's a lot further to travel, and it's not really necessary when there are some other groups that they can transfer into much closer. So I think the likelihood of that happening is much lower. But as I said, they're just so understudied. We just don't have a lot of data. I think the last census that was done in Nyungwe was 2011. We don't have any genotyping done, so we're not really sure, who's going where. We can hypothesize based on what we know about chimps and that sort of thing, but actual hard data, we don't have it yet. But it's coming. It's on the cards. So watch this space, and hopefully within the next couple of years we will be able to explore those sort of questions and have a better idea of who's going where and how frequently, and are they taking some of that sort of their cultural or ecological traditions with them and sort of spreading that out to those new communities and that sort of thing.
So there's no evidence or suspicion that it's a subspecies of the eastern chimp. It does seem to be they're just eastern chimps that just have adapted to another.
Yeah.
It's freezing up there. I've been in the forest there, and it's nighttime. It's freezing.
What are they doing up there?
I don't know what they're doing up there.
But that's
it's
right.
all that nice warm tropical forest.
Yeah. But it means there are less mosquitoes, so that's one benefit.
Well,
yeah, that's a good one.
No, it's very interesting. Thanks, Natasha.
No problem. We have a question from Tallulah. Maybe Debbie and I can answer this one. We want to know how technology features in land mapping and animal observations.
Oh, loads.
Yeah, it has a rocket scientist, and she's looking at how space related technology can help in your kind of work and roles. Debbie, do you want to take this one, or?
We'll do a little bit. Yeah. So with our mapping, JGI's had a long-term relationship with Google and with NASA and with anybody who does land mapping. So we are able to get images of, I think it's 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters, isn't it, Natasha?
I think the resolution is actually even better than that.
Even better than that now. So we were able to like hone down onto a forest edge, and we can see households, people, pathways. We can map all of that, and through citizen science, we've been able to, you know, you imagine the amount of data that's out there. We give a group one set, and they sit there and they map everything out for us. We've also used that same programs to teach local community. So part of the forest monitors in Tanzania that's now working in Uganda and in Burundi is with the phone technology. They can go out and map human activities as well as chimpanzees and other wildlife. That can then be downloaded and uploaded, not only for JGI to see, but also for Global Forest Watch to see immediately. So one of the things Global Forest Watch was concerned about was every year they were reporting in hindsight how much more forest we'd lost. They weren't able to alert people that forest is being cut down right now and to send people there to stop it being cut down when they knew it was a protected forest. So there's a lot more proactive approach to trying to stop deforestation, which is a big part of it. Drone technology we're using as well. And there is the ability, like what we've done with animals with mapping is with the collars, and you can even put what they call fencing collars, so you know if an individual is moving out of a protected area as well. So all of that technology is being used all the time.
Yeah. And just to sort of build on what Debbie was saying, and to answer the question about drones, it is looking more and more like indirect observation. So using drones and camera traps and even audio traps now is becoming more the norm than the old school having a scientist going out in the forest and following the chimps. For a variety of reasons. I mean, the volume of data that you can collect with technology, it far surpasses anything that a human can get on their own.
Yep. One of the great ones we'd like to do is with the drones is to do the thermal imaging, and if it could be done at nighttime, they could just run across a forest and they'd be able to count all the chimp bodies for us in the trees. And then we would get a census, you know, in a few days instead of several months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The more the technology advances and evolves, the more it's going to become integrated into conservation across the board, not just for chimps, but just all conservation. The potential for application is just massive. So yeah.
I think for solving the technology, I would say monitoring, don't you think, Natasha? Is being able to censor as quickly and as cheaply as possible, because when we have to put a lot of boots on the ground and cover an area, for a long period of time, it's eating away to money that could go for conservation. So it ends up happening that it doesn't get done. And so we end up still thinking that, we've only got this many chimpanzees, or we've got this many and we don't have them, because we don't really know. Yeah. So being able to have a effective monitoring program that it would allow us to censor the chimp populations across all of our forests, say every 3 years, we would then be able to have an idea of what's going on with the population. Is it stable? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then also monitoring the forests themselves as well. So the resolution that we can now get from that GIS technology is incredible. We can see basically a tree that's been cut down, like individual trees. So being able to monitor, incursions, disturbances, clearance incidences in like key conservation areas is really crucial.
And I'd say phenology too, Natasha. If this sort of technology could help map flowering and fruiting trees from above, that would be awesome, because then we could sort of start calculating how much carrying capacity there is in a forest, and is that changing because of climate change?
Yeah, again, applications are huge. You can do the phenology, so you're monitoring changes in seasonal availability of different resources, but then also you can do vegetation surveys. So you can look at the quality of the habitat, you can see the diversity, the richness, the composition, all that sort of thing, which gives you an idea of the overall health of a forest or a grassland, or whatever sort of habitat that you're looking at. Honestly, the possibilities are endless.
We've just got one question that's come through. It might have come through privately, and it just says phone. So I'm so sorry, there's no name attached to it. And this might be the final question for the evening, if no one's got any more. If you do, just pop them in now, because we really want to give everyone the opportunity. But they have asked how involved is Jane in the Burundi project, and are other countries fundraising? So perhaps to help us reach this goal. I'm sorry, I don't have a name for that question, but Tash or Debbie?
Well, we do know that Jane is very supportive of this work. She has stated publicly that Burundi does hold a very special place in her heart. So she is very supportive of this work, and trying to get the word out and helping us make it as successful as possible.
And I think JJ Belgium helps out a little bit with some of the field work, don't they?
I
with roots and shoots groups?
Yeah, I think Belgium's doing some tree planting.
Yeah.
Not directly involved with the Musée Vivant sort of work, but some of the sort of broader conservation work with tree planting and things, to my understanding.
Yeah, I guess that speaks as well to the fact that the donations that we raise within Australia, it really does show how impactful every gift is and how far every dollar goes, because we're really only doing fundraising in this country. So anything that we receive is from you guys, and that's all the Burundi are receiving. So super important, and a really, really special project for us here for the Australian team.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's no other comments. Tallulah has just written, can I look up this video on YouTube to show my dad? I think you mean the recording, if that's, but of course we will share the YouTube video for you. No problem at all. Laura and I will take care of that, Tallulah, and we'll make sure we email you.
And just also, Tallulah, I got your direct message question, so I will respond to you via email. So I'll make sure to get details from Jess and follow up with you later in the week.
Yeah, and that's for everybody as well. If you've got any questions that you didn't think of while we're online, feel free to email the info line, which is attached to all of the emails. You can also respond to the email that you received this link with, and we can delegate questions to Debbie or Tash or Léonidas, and we'll get them answered for you, and we'll provide all of the information on our website, but we'll make sure we get any queries that you have, we'll get them answered. So feel free to just reach out to our team.
Great. Well, I think that's a wrap for tonight, everyone. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really, really enjoyed being here with you, sharing the information and the successes that we've achieved so far. And thank you if you've supported us in our journey. Thank you in advance if you're planning to support us. And yeah, we're really looking forward to sharing the journey with you and sharing more of our successes as we go along.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for joining in and listening to us rattle on about our favourite subject.